welcome everyone to another episode of Podium Stories. Today we have a very special guest in the building. His name is Vella. He's the founder of Zeroto7, the first marketing consultancy dedicated to helping European startups achieve international growth. We're both here in Europe as well, so it's going to be a very interesting conversation to have. A bit more about Zeroto7. It's a network of communication experts who work for some of the best known brands in the world, and most recently some of Europe's most successful startups as well. Phil, thank you so much for being here.
No worries, Marty. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So before we get into European expansion, I want to ask you about the early days of Zeroto7 and how it came to be. So at what point did you decide to branch out and start the company?
It hasn't been an extremely long amount of time. And in fact, I was just thinking about it before that a quarter of the time we've been around has been during the pandemic. So it's been an interesting, period. I was freelancing for a couple of years in Paris. I moved from London to Paris. I'm originally from Australia. And from freelancing, I just decided that it needed to be, what I was doing needed to be more of a kind of a cohesive group. And I was working with people that I'd worked with before on a freelance basis, and kind of decided that working as a collective of experts was a really good way to service what we were already doing, which was mainly startups in France, but based in Paris at the time. And I'd always had the idea that I wanted to kind of work independently because during my corporate life, like I wasn't a very good corporate, what's the word? A very good corporate watchdog.
Right.
That's not really the word, but you know what I mean? Like I always felt like a bit out of place in some of the bigger corporations I worked with. And in the back of my mind, I think I always had the idea that doing something independently would be a good idea. And so when I moved to France, like I said, I started out by freelancing and then basically went from there.
What are the challenges of working as a collective, right? Because I run a small company. We're 5 full-time people plus a few contractors.
Yep.
We've been running for 3 years, I believe, in a couple months. And I understand how it works from a company with employees standpoint. But when you're working as a collective, I'm guessing there's a different hierarchy and a different way to work together. What are the challenges that you've seen from that?
The biggest challenge is, so part of the reason why I do it that way is a little bit to avoid the need to have employees in some European countries. In France, it's pretty difficult to have employees. The regulation is painful. But it was actually not even prompted by that. It was the fact that these people are experts in their field. So the biggest challenge with that is making sure that these people who are also working independently, that they're actually available. So when I scope out a job that can last for 3 months to kind of ongoing, and I say, I've got this amazing SEO expert who used to work for eBay, and then he's not available during part of the time of the project, like just before I go to kick off because it hasn't been confirmed, that managing people's time. So it's one of the things that's important is to keep, I wouldn't say keep your options open, but like keep meeting new people, trying out to work with them, see what they're like. Because part of the advantage for the business is that I've already vetted these people in a way. It's not just that they work for me and I've hired them so I think they're good. It's the fact that I know that they can do what's required and do it like without even kind of reason or sweat. So the challenge is keeping people kind of occupied and maintaining that network of people that can work with you.
Right, because we work with one of our clients is a similar company. If I understand what you guys do in comparison to them, they help European companies grow within Europe, while it seems like you guys also help them grow outside of Europe and international.
It started because when I first started working in France, my biggest selling point was the matching of being a kind of a experienced marketer with being a native English speaker.
Right.
And French people are a little bit afraid of going to the US in particular.
Yeah.
And so having that help with the skill set that I have was my biggest selling point.
Yeah. I can relate to that because I'm a dual citizen Spanish American.
Yep.
And there's we don't have Spanish clients just because like the culture is different and the badges are different as well.
Right.
But with my communication with Spanish marketers, there's this fear that Europeans have of going internationally, especially to the United States, right? It seems like the major league. and they don't want to go into it. So tell me more about like why like Europeans are afraid to go to the United States, while in my opinion the difference in skill is not that large.
This is actually a great thing for you and I to talk about, because like just in general, right? We could probably talk about this for hours, because you have the firsthand experience of it, and I'm kind of experiencing it from the outside and shaking my head and saying like, what are you actually afraid of? I said France because that's my experience, but I guessed that it must be other places in Europe. I got to say, like right now I'm in Germany, and so the Germans don't have the same attitude. Like they're kind of like, no, we'll go there. We're fine, you know. And I don't think it's a language thing. I used to think it was a language thing, and I'm not so sure. I think it's partially in the French case, without getting too specific, it's partially based on the way that they actually learn English, where it's like, or even the way they learn French, it's very strict. Like you have to follow these rules with your language, and if you make a mistake, that's a really bad thing. Whereas one of the beautiful things about being a native English speaker is like poetic license as a marketer is everything, right? The fact that you can express yourself kind of however you want within reason is part of the beauty of communicating in English. And I think that fear is one thing that holds French people back in particular, but I have seen it in other countries. But then, as I say, conversely, I've seen other countries in Europe that just do not have that fear. And I think culture is a really big part of it. But when we talk about culture, I'm not talking about the difference between the way that Spanish people go out and have dinner at midnight on a Friday, as opposed to French people do at 8. And, you know, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about working culture. And that's a really big thing that I think a lot of people get shocked by. And one big aspect of that is expectation. So if we're working with someone who's trying to grow into a new country, particularly UK or US, the difference in expectation is one thing that they have to kind of work with, right? And that can be something as small as when they show up for a meeting, right? It sounds ridiculous, but if you've experienced it, you know exactly what I'm talking about. In the case where if you do that to certain people or in certain countries, that's it. You're kind of like, you've actually lost your shot at selling them something, because they're like, these people don't care. And they're like, no, what are you talking about? It's a 15-minute window. No, man, it's not a 15-minute window.
It's a 0-minute window.
It sounds ridiculous, but it's true. But that's a really small example of what happens, the differences in working culture. And if you've lived and worked in different, in a European country and the US, then you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Absolutely. In terms of working culture, I just think I know more the Spanish market rather than the French market. But I've been to France, I've been to other parts in Italy, I mean in Europe. And the working culture is completely different. Even our understanding of success, right, and what the success mean and failure as well is a completely different understanding than the US, UK, and those more competitive markets or capitalistic markets. And even from a personal culture side, like you were saying, like going to dinner and all that stuff, I do think that it kind of makes it different a little bit as well, because the way you get along with those people is different in America with our European peers.
Well, I mean, if you're talking about sales and marketing, right? Like, you know, the fact that you usually, you know, now's a bit different. You want to go and see people or see them face to face. That interpersonal stuff, I think that kind of stuff can get passed by. But I think, like I said before, the expectation is one of the biggest things. And I think what you're saying about success is really interesting, because what do you mean by success and failure in comparison to, let's say, a European mindset versus an American mindset?
Yeah, absolutely. So, for example, I think failure in the United States is celebrated. Like, there's no such thing as failure, because you can always try again. And we've seen this BC saying, I only invest in founders who have already failed once. Versus in European and Spain particularly, I think if you fail once, people consider you as a failure, versus considering failure as a learning experience. And maybe that doesn't relate as much as in specific marketing projects, but from a company standpoint, I do think it makes a big difference.
Well, when you're trying to get somebody to, let's pretend it's a Spanish company. I haven't worked with anyone in Spain, right? But if we took a Spanish company who has, we work with B2B SaaS startups, right? So if you had a B2B SaaS startup in Spain and they've exhausted the market, or they've found, enough of a market penetration in Spain that they need to look outside. And the most logical, which usually depends on the industry, is to go to the US, right? Or the UK, right? They want to start with an English speaking market. What I think when we're talking about success and failure, one thing that's kind of interesting is that, like, at a certain point, they feel like they've kind of made it,
Right.
and maybe they don't want to take that
Right.
leap, right? Yeah. Or they feel like there's a lot of instances lately of these businesses that start to expand and then sell out. Right. And that's a European, that's a kind of a general situation in Europe at the moment where, and people are criticizing it. Like, why did you sell out? You can get it from both sides, but like in the US, as you say, it's not considered in the same way. It's kind of shoot for the stars or nothing. That's a little bit of the attitude. And in Europe, it's a little bit more cautious. Yeah. A little bit more step by step. And that's something that I think that's the thing that we need to change before they start to have more European unicorns.
Absolutely. And you're probably saying the same thing, but one thing that I think relates to that is the word ambition. I always talk about this. The word ambition in the United States, it's a positive attribute. Like, if you go to a job interview and you say, I'm an ambitious person, they're going to consider you hardworking, competitive, striving for more. Like, it's a positive attribute. Versus in Spain, the word ambition, ambición, is a negative attribute. It's greedy. It's considered selfish. Right? So I think that difference in mindset is also very important, and it reflects in how companies attribute and why we see less unicorns in Europe as well.
What's super interesting is, though, that you just hit on the language part.
Right.
And like, so if you said, what's the big difference between somebody going to a new country? Language is the number one thing that's different, obviously. But you just gave a reason why the language is not just about, I always say, like, translation is not localization.
Right. I saw that in your website.
Yeah. So it's like, and what that basically means is you can't just translate something and therefore it works in that country, because you've just pointed out why the very word ambition is perceived totally differently. So when we take someone's message, we have to make sure it's not just about making it sound good and translating the way that they present themselves. It's about making sure that it resonates in the same way. And I think that's one of the most difficult things for Europeans going into an English-speaking market. They see certain things as, that's marketing. Can I swear on this, or?
Oh, I would like you to swear.
Okay, because I am Australian, like I said, and it's like literally I was wondering whether it's okay. They see it as marketing bullshit, right? Which, okay, yeah, maybe sometimes it can come across like that, but that's part of the perception of the way they see certain words, right? And that kind of working culture is really interesting when you go from one place to another. Yeah.
Right, because I'm guessing that's one of the biggest challenges that companies face, right? Like, if they're creating content for inbound and you're just translating what you wrote in French to American, it's a completely different message.
You can't do it. You can't do that. In fact, what's starting to happen, and I would imagine this is probably happening in Spain too, is that the ambitious ones are realizing that they need to be actually English speaking first in their communication at the very least.
Yeah.
Right. If they are in an industry or a market that they're going to reach a certain cap, like I said before, in their own country quickly, at a very early stage, they will be advised and also have the notion themselves that they need to go outside. Therefore, their communication needs to be in English. So you see a lot of, in France at least, a lot of businesses that are kind of English first in their communication. So that makes it easier in a way to then have them just take the English stuff and translate it into French. Right. And then they can kind of do with it whatever they want, because that's not what the goal is. The goal is to be able to grow outside of the country. I think that's one of the coolest things about Europe, actually, is because I saw this thing from a VC when I was first starting doing this, and that gave me the kind of the channel that I thought was good to focus on, was that she was saying there literally isn't a European country that's big enough in any market, almost any market, right, where if you are successful in that market, that's enough.
Right.
At some point, you're going to have to grow outside that. And if whilst growing within the European Union is more than big enough, doing that is super complicated.
Exactly.
Right? It's an incredibly complicated thing from a language and a working culture point of view. So that's why a lot of them, the smarter ones, are starting to be English first, which is great for me. But yeah, I guess sucks for them sometimes.
And a couple of thoughts from that. I think countries are starting to be more English first as well. So not just specific marketers and business people, but I see more globalization and Americanization of each European country as a
I mean, that would be a shame.
It is.
That would be a shame.
I don't like it, but it is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I think that reflects also in how business operates.
Yeah. I mean, can I flip it on you a bit and ask you some questions?
Oh, sure.
You went to play basketball in America, if I read that correctly.
Yeah. So I was born in America.
Okay.
I came to Spain when I was a year old, so I don't remember. And I was raised here in Spain until I was 17.
Okay.
Then moved to America to play basketball, came back, and then it's been.
So you have that's a real balance between the two in terms of your experience and time in each culture, right?
I'm more Spanish, but I'm like 50-50. My identity is kind of split between.
Yeah. I would think. I mean, growing up in a multicultural country like Australia, it would be a real shame. And being the child of immigrants, because my dad actually came from France, it would be a real shame if the culture was taken over in that way, like the actual culture. But if we're just talking about business, it makes perfect sense. And it's happened through history. It's happened multiple times. Like, French used to be the language of diplomacy, right?
Yeah.
It was super important that you had to speak French in a certain period of time.
Latin first, then French.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, yeah, exactly. Perfect example. So that's just what's happening. So it would suck if it kind of permeated into other cultures. I think like business it's fine to be one thing.
Yeah.
But it isn't life, So like.
Yeah, but like I was. And this is not very business related, but like I was hanging out with a few friends the other day, and I realized that one every 25 words that they say is in English. So something like saying the word random instead of saying aleatorio made no sense to me. I'm like, I can speak English, but you cannot speak English. Why are you using that?
Yeah.
So it's interesting to see how it like permeating.
To flip that back to marketing, no, you said it's not a business related thing. It is, because to flip that back to marketing for a second, one thing that, I mean, I've been coming to France since I was really young, and that's a while ago. I've noticed how the advertising has changed in that respect, right? Like, I guess they have a term in Spanish, but the term in French is franglais, which is like when you meld the two. English and Spanglish, exactly right. And you see like these billboard posters in the train station that are literally half in one language and half in the other, and sometimes it's like stuff that's like, your grandmother needs to use that. Like, how is she gonna understand what the hell that is, right? But it's kind of like English has become the communication default to it's not just the business language, it's become the way that you express things. And so, for business, for me, it's fine. But the more it comes into the general culture, it's a bit of it's not cool for me.
Yeah, I'm back to what you were saying about expanding.
Yep.
Right. I understand, and tell me if like my understanding is correct. But if you're a French B2B SaaS company, we usually work with B2B companies, so I understand the space.
Okay, cool.
And you want to expand because you have like taken over the French market, and you think you need to take the next step.
Yep.
I think like you're saying, it makes more sense to expand to an English-speaking country.
Yes.
Because even if you could expand to the EU, there's like 7 or 8 different languages with different cultures.
It depends. The first thing that like people that any business should consider, the most important thing is what industry are they in.
Right.
Right? Because it can be that they reach a good penetration in their country really quickly because of the industry they're in. But that doesn't mean that the next one is an English speaking market. I'll give you an example. Like I was talking with an Estonian construction SaaS company, right? Like super interesting little niche, right? Yeah. And it's like, what was next for them was they were going to go to Finland.
Hmm.
Now, I didn't realize that the languages are fairly close and the culture is fairly close, so that makes sense. But that wasn't what they were trying to work on. They were trying to work on, well, what do we do when we go to the UK? Now, you're working in construction, so like you've got to like and it was a kind of a digitization product. Mm-hmm. So you've got to understand what people are doing on a job site in the UK differently to what they do in Estonia, how people behave with their phones. You know, just like that kind of level of detail is may not mean that the UK is the best for you. Conversely, like fintech, I think is a really great example because fintech is so heavily influenced by regulation, right? And what people's needs are from country to country, that a product that works really well in Spain, I'm not saying this is the case, but it may not work so well in Italy because of the different, like let's say it's a business, there's a lot of small business neobanks at the moment, at least in France there was. And, you know, the needs of the guy in France is not the same as the needs of the guy in Italy, and it's not the same as the needs of the guy in the UK. Language is almost secondary to the regulation and the environment that the product has to exist in certain industries. In others, yeah, the first leap, in my opinion, they should always make, if their goal is the US, going to the US to me seems ridiculous when you can just hop over the pond, try it out in the UK, right, and then move on. You know, you got to change a couple of Z's, some S's to some Z's, and, you know, remove a few vowels here and there. That's about it, right? But like, why would you go and try so far away when you've got a great test bed just across the water there?
Right, it's like trying in a smaller sample versus like going to the second division before you go to the first division.
Exactly. If you want to make a football analogy, make a football analogy is perfect for me. I love it. Fantastic.
So tell me a bit more about like how the process works, right? Like, so let's say I run a B2B SaaS company that has done well in Spain.
Yep.
And I'm pondering how do we expand internationally?
Yep.
What are some of the things that I need to consider, or how does the process work when working with you to understand what's the next step and how to make that transition?
I mean, the process with us is a fairly particular kind of methodology that we employ and have tried, like, you know, multiple times. I'm still kind of tweaking it. As I said, we haven't been around for that long. But the first is always we do an audit of all their existing kind of marketing. So we want access to everything. But for anybody, if you're expanding into another market, all that stuff I just said before about industry is the first consideration, right? Because sometimes I've gone with people and they say, we're going to go here. And then by the end of a couple of weeks, I'm already thinking, no, you're not going to go there. And then eventually kind of convince them that it doesn't really make sense. I mean, people kind of have an irrational reason. Sometimes it's America because it's America. And that's a great ambition to have, right? So the industry is the first thing. What I try and do is, once we've identified where, is find some local market experts in that field. Even if it's someone just I know personally who's like, let's say the construction example is a great one. Like, I know some builders from living in London. Right. And I'm going to ring them up and say, hey, what do you do when this happens? Right. And then who else can I talk to? And try and do some customer interviews. Yeah. Which these days is coming more into the product management part of a lot of these small businesses. Product managers are doing a lot of that stuff, but I always like to do it myself because I think it's super important to have that feedback at the beginning. And then beyond that, once we have a bit of that info, that allows us to find out, like, are there competitors? You know, what other pieces of research do we need to find out about that particular market?
Yeah, what's a good timeline, more or less, in terms of like how long? I know it's a very case by case scenario.
What do you mean by timeline? Like from when to when they start to when do they succeed? Or
no, more of like not when they succeed, because that's not a definite number.
Or they fail. Maybe they fail.
They probably fail if they're not working with you. But but from the time I'm from, like, okay, I think I want to expand internationally to penetrating and starting on a market. Like, do you think usually takes over a year? Like what have you seen? That's the average time before to take care of the deal process.
Yeah, it's a really, yeah, I'd say, I mean, a year is probably safe.
Okay.
I'd say a year would be safe. So let's look at it this way, right? If you're sitting in, let's say you're in a market where you have to expand outside of it immediately, right? If that's the case, you should be looking for leads, for prospects, for businesses outside of your country from the very beginning. Some people have the attitude that you should create an office in a particular country that you want to grow in. My attitude is that you should actually sell somewhere successfully before you even think about that.
Right.
So there is no point creating an office if you've never sold there. If you can't sell your product remotely, you're not 1,000 times better just by being there permanently, right? And plus the costs and all that kind of thing that goes with it. If someone's doing well in their own country and they're trying to expand outside, it does sometimes take a really long time for them to get that first one outside of their market. And yeah, I would say a year from beginning trying to actually successfully landing a deal for we're talking enterprise level, probably software is probably the best way to put it, because obviously online SaaS businesses, they can do it much faster. So for them, that year would be, have they actually proved that there is a success in that country? So
the goal first is to like prove that you can actually win in that market before you full on go into the market and get the office and all the other like bullshit around. Like, is that how you guys trying to like look at it first? Like get some small wins first?
That is my advice and what I would say. Like you read conflicting, and some people say you can't sell, particularly in America, unless you're there. And my attitude is like, I mean, think of it right now. I think right now is a great example of what's going on. Like what's happened to us in the past few months is all the kind of prospects and projects we had that were literally ready to sign at the middle of March kind of died off. And I think a lot of people had that experience, and it's now come back a lot. But I had never sold one without meeting the person before this experience.
Yeah.
And now I've done that multiple times.
Right.
So, okay, this is a different environment we're in now, but if you can't do that, or if you can't do most of your meetings via video before you go somewhere, then maybe your product doesn't have the kind of tangible benefits that you think it does, or you're presenting it badly. And before all this happened, you could always fly there for a meeting. Right. So if you can't close the deal from seeing them face to face, then yeah, you probably do have a problem.
But and do you have a couple more minutes, Phil?
Actually, I was just thinking before when you said 25 minutes, I was thinking that I don't, but just give me a sec, because I had a meeting scheduled, but it's not one that I actually have to go to.
We can do a part 2 next week if you'd like.
No. Let me just check, because I have a deadline. A client, I gave a client a deadline.
I think you need to attend them. I think
that's no. He has to give me something before I can talk to him. So I need to call, and then if he comes back, we'll see. Sorry.
Yeah. So I was asking about, so with COVID and quarantine, do you think that kind of has like equaled the playing field for European companies trying to go there? Since now the physical connection and one-on-one relationships are kind of died down, even if you're in America as well.
That is a great question that I do not have the answer to.
That's fair.
No, it's a great question. I think right now is one of the greatest business learning experiences that anyone can have.
Yeah.
Right? That sounds bad considering like there's a lot of stuff going on that is really horrible. There's more coming, right? I don't think many people have a real concept of what probably is going to happen over the next couple of years. There's going to be a lot of pain. But if somebody has a business that's doing reasonably well, it's probably not a bad time to be your own boss.
Yeah.
Right? And you're gonna learn a lot about what needs to happen for you to really succeed. I think I don't know about Spain, but especially in France and maybe other parts of Europe, there was a bit more, things were going pretty well, right? Like for in startup world, they were going pretty well. And this is a little bit of a reality check in terms of funding levels and what is going to get funded and what's going to succeed. I don't know if it's a leveling the playing field for Europeans though. I think maybe what we were talking about before about that attitude is starting to change in terms of ambition versus failure and how to measure success, and more people wanting to be their own boss and more people wanting to start their own company and younger people wanting to do it.
Yeah.
I think that kind of thing is going to change, is going to have a bigger effect in the long run on European business than maybe even the pandemic or,
Yeah, I was asking because like on our personal case as a company, obviously we're an agency as well, so it's not a SaaS company. But when I'm here in Spain, I always think that there was a disadvantage with companies that are similar doing stuff while they're based in the United States. And that's why one of the reasons why I was planning on moving there full time in September, which is not going to happen anymore.
Right.
But right now it seems like the playing field has kind of equaled down for everybody, since we're doing Zoom meetings and our competitors are doing Zoom meetings as well, even if they're 5 minutes away. So it's something interesting that we've seen that I think some European companies will see as well, especially if they can present and sell over digital.
I think the biggest impact is going to be, actually, yeah, that's a good point. So yeah, selling remotely is necessary, so therefore they should get better at it. But like you just said before about you're not going to move there. So surely your attitude towards growing in the US, if anyone was thinking about it, has to have changed, right? Like, and by that I just mean neither positively nor negatively, but you probably view it slightly differently, like what your plan is and how you think you can do it, and who you're, like all of that's probably required a reassessment. I'm sure there was a bunch of people that were moving there, for or expanding there this year that haven't been able to do that. So that may not be a bad thing, because I think sometimes, Europeans look at the US as like the golden turkey. Is that a term? Okay. Whereas, like Europe has a bigger population, more diverse. Like I honestly believe if you can succeed in multiple European countries, you are on an absolute winner.
Yeah. Sure.
And I'm sure you could get a decent return in the US as well. But I think hopefully over the next few years, we do see more bigger businesses in Europe staying here, growing, more unicorns. That would be very cool.
Awesome, Phil. Phil, I appreciate you taking the time to do this. I think we could talk about Europe and the United States for hours and hours. But man, I wanted to let you know that I really appreciate your time.
No worries.
Thank you for being here. Where can our listeners reach out to you? We'll put a link to the website below as well. But is LinkedIn a good way to?
LinkedIn, if anyone wants to talk to me, yeah. Twitter's my my kind of social media of choice.
Okay.
I'm a big user of Twitter, as long as they can handle the swearing, of course, because I do swear on Twitter as well.
I hope they do. If they don't, they don't deserve to follow me. And I hope they like this football content as well on Twitter, because I saw like.
Oh, you saw. Okay, right. That's why you threw that in.
Phil and I get along.
Yeah. We didn't get a chance to talk about that. We can talk about that forever. Unfortunately, we can't watch any live. That's the biggest problem at the moment.
Yeah, I'm just happy Real Madrid won the La Liga the other day, so I'm gonna hide a little bit.
Do you know what's super funny is I was gonna do the meeting in the office, but it's just like it's white here, and it was a bit too distracted, it looked a bit bad. But right behind me is all my football scarves. So I was gonna be like, hey,
Yeah. This is what I do after 5 p.m.
Yeah. Actually, so I guess you'll edit the bits out, but like I just want to say before we go, tell me, can you? Because he's just told me that he hasn't delivered what I needed him to deliver, so I'm good for a little bit while longer. But I just want to talk to you for a sec. What do you guys do, and how can I push people in your direction, maybe?
Yeah. I was actually, when you were talking, I was like, after the episode, I'm going to send him an email because I think there's some synergy together. So just to give you a quick overview, we help B2B companies and B2B CEOs grow their personal brand and create content at scale to drive inbound opportunities. So we've found an in-between place we started as a personal branding company, Now we're more of a thought leadership with a big focus on the executive team and CEOs.
Yep.
So we work with B2B companies and B2B CEOs that want to create more content, but they even don't have the expertise to do it or don't have the time to do it. And we help them achieve that at scale with a minimum time input from their executive. So in terms of services, we're very good at LinkedIn, Twitter content, and articles that are ghostwritten by us for the CEO and stuff.
Yep.
We have partnerships with public relation companies for companies that want to be published on Forbes, all those places. And the last service that we're offering right now, which is still in beta, but it's working pretty well for the couple people that are doing it. We call it the personal brand in a box, which is we help you start a podcast, and then we repurpose it into over 50 pieces of content across Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, a podcast, newsletter, an article. So it's a bit of like a lot from one place.
Okay.
And we usually work with B2B companies that are around like in 5,000 types. So like over $2 or $3 million is usually our sweet spot. We work with some below, but that's usually
in revenue or raised?
In revenue, usually.
Really good talking to you.
Absolutely, Phil. If we were,
I hope that was helpful, mate.
It was super good. If we were like not in quarantine, I'd tell you to fly out somewhere.
Dude, you're in Barcelona. I'd do it in a heartbeat. I'm in Stuttgart. Have you ever been to Stuttgart?
I've been to a few places in Germany, but not Stuttgart yet. I don't have a good soccer teim, but
they did. They did. They just come back up to Bundesliga this year, and yeah, I can't go watch. All right, cool, man. Take it easy.
Awesome.
Thank you.
I appreciate you, man.
Ciao. Bye.